G'day wherever you are, and welcome to From the Black Hole with Lars Lowther and Jeff Salisbury. And I'm Rob Notenboom. We're very excited about our show today because for the first time in our podcast short history, we have a special guest. Broadcaster, journalist, and proprietor of the blog the11.ca, Stephen Sander is our guest on the podcast today. He will help us discuss the ongoing men's Under-20 World Cup qualifying campaign and the recently released Eastern Report into a professional developmental league in Canada. But first off, here's Jeff with a reminder about our hashtag challenge.
Well, this is Jeff here. So, we are 2 weeks into our inaugural hashtag challenge. So basically, the idea behind this is we are challenging all of our lovely dedicated listeners out there to come up with the wittiest tweet using the hashtag US Men's National Team Is. Basically, the hashtag symbol and USMNT is. And so the whole idea behind this is we just want to have a little fun making fun of our favorite Yanks to the South for their crappy performance in one of the recent games where their entire fan base was freaking out about how poor they did, and we know that pain all too well. So basically, whoever comes up with the wittiest response, and we're going to let everybody know which one we've chosen as the best one in our upcoming episode, is going to win themselves a free 6-pack of beer courtesy of From the Black Hole. So everybody put your thinking caps on and have a little bit of fun making friend of the Yanks. So, yeah.
So welcome back to episode 3. Here we are again. We're a little later than we anticipated, and that has to do with some of our busy schedules. But we've got a interesting show today, and we've got a special guest on board. For the first time, we've never had a special guest, but of course this is only the third episode, so this is actually a surprise in a way. We've got Stephen Sander here from the 11.ca. He's a guy that I think Lars and Jeff and I all admire. We all read his stuff. We're pretty impressed, and we feel kind of proud of ourselves for talking to him. I think Jeff late Saturday night, kind of 2 o'clock in the morning-ish, decided to invite him on. And
there may have been beer involved in that.
There may have been beer involved. That's not a big surprise, actually, coming from Jeff. But we're very happy. So welcome, Steve.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
And we're going to talk today about under-20s, and we're going to talk about the Eastern Report. And I don't know about you guys. I was glued to my laptop last night, which was Monday night. We're recording this on Tuesday night, Tuesday the 19th, to see what the under-20s were going to do. And I don't know. There's a Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." So I guess we could say that was an interesting display, perhaps. Steve, I want to get your thoughts. What do you think about our under-20s against Cuba? An unfortunate 2-1 decision against them.
I think the thing that stuck out for me in that game was talking to Nick Dasovic in the lead-up, and he was quite confident that they were going to be able to handle the altitude conditions. And remember, where they're playing in Puebla is at about 7,000 feet. That, in respect to something that might be more familiar to us, Denver is at about 5,200 feet. So Puebla is about another 2,000 feet higher. And if you've ever been there, you know how thin the air is in Denver. So those are challenging conditions to be sure. But Canada went down early to acclimate and really worked hard at being used to those conditions. And what really stunned me in the second half is that the Cubans looked like they had a lot more gas in the tank than the Canadians did. It looked like the Canadians, the whole 90 minutes, were playing to conserve energy and thinking about that second game against Nicaragua. And we're never really going all out, where the Cubans, a country that's pretty well at sea level, and most of these guys don't play outside of that country, that was able to come up and handle those conditions, I think, a lot better than Canada, who's been down there for a couple of weeks.
What about like from a tactical standpoint or from an individual player standpoint? Did you see anything that was a surprise, or things that you would have predicted, or what do you think about thoughts on those two fronts?
There was 3 spots where I thought Canada really struggled, which was the communication between these 2 center backs just wasn't existing, and as well the goalkeeper's got to take some fault there. Crepeau's got to do a better job of directing traffic, and a lot of times Daniil Henry, and on Twitter today, you would have seen him take a lot of blame for a lot of the mistakes that were made in the back, especially on the 2 goals. But it's the keeper's job to direct traffic, and he's got to be the one, as he sees the attacks coming in, letting the backs know where to go and where to break out. And it really looked like that Henry especially didn't know which way to go. As well, he was caught a lot trying to back up Marco Lepena, who really struggled at left back. I actually thought that maybe he was even the weaker link. Santa Cruz, who played out on the outside right for the Cubans, was absolutely having his way with him. And even before the goal, Crepeau had to make that wonderful save off of Reyes, which was set up by a Santa Cruz cross after he blew by Lepena. Mm-hmm. The first goal came after Reyes blew by Lepena, and Henry tried to bail him out. Mm-hmm. Henry came over to that wing position to try to stop the attack. I think that's a place where maybe Canada's got to look at making a change. And again, Samuel Piette, as the guy that's supposed to be in the back of that midfield and providing the solidity back there, there was so much of a gap between the back 4 and the midfield that Cuba was exploiting. They were just running into space. This huge gap between the midfield and the fullbacks and the center backs that was just really hard to explain. And Cuba was finding a lot of space, a lot of room to attack and to sort of gather themselves to come at the Canadians, simply because Canada wasn't compact enough in that area. And I thought there was a lot of struggling in terms of linking those things up. I don't think it's an X's and O's problem in the sense that I don't think Dasovic came out with the wrong formation. I think it was the execution of those X's and O's where some of those players just sort of lost themselves, and I think lost themselves positionally on the game plan. I don't think the X's and O's would have had Piette that far up. I don't think that they would have had Lepena taking that many chances up the wing and really getting caught as much as he did. And I think those are things that have got to be addressed, and those are positions where I think if Canada can fix those problems, they can still get through with a decent result against Nicaragua.
Well, let's maybe geographically speaking, since we went furthest out to Edmonton for our first blurb there, let's bring it back a little closer to Saskatoon. And Jeff, why don't you pick up there?
I'm sorry, I was chomping at the bit to get in on this already.
That's all right.
Yeah. Well, with to me, the biggest question coming out of that game, and I even asked Jason DeVos about this on Twitter right afterwards, but I don't know. It seemed like Dasovic didn't have any impact whatsoever on calming the players down in the first half in any way, and then giving us some type of game plan to work with moving into the second half. And then once Cuba scored that first goal, our guys just kind of became unglued. I mean, Piette's play went from being poor to absolutely atrocious after the first goal for the rest of the game. Like he was completely out of it for the rest of the game, which is shocking because, I mean, right now Piette, to me, I think has got to be one of the beacons of hope in this particular age group. At least he's kind of been touted that way by a lot of the soccer bloggers out there. I think even Jason DeVos has made mention of that once or twice. It might have been DeVos, but regardless, maybe it was Steve Sandor. But
who's that again?
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, it's just like I want to find out like what was Dasovic doing to try and pull us out of the proverbial black hole. Oh boy, did you see that plug coming?
Nice.
I know.
We've mentioned the podcast already.
Yeah, I know. It's
on
over.
the podcast.
Yeah.
If we have to mention the podcast on the podcast, we're
probably not doing well.
Yeah, we're not doing a good job of promoting ourselves.
Yeah, Steve, you're gonna have to bail us out of this one. It's already a downhill slide, but. Anyway, yeah, it really to me, it's like what was Dasovic doing to actually save us in that game? I didn't see very much, and it didn't seem like we were prepared at all. I don't know about you guys, but it looked like we were keeping some possession in the back. We'd move it up to midfield, and the second that we got anywhere near their final third, we just completely ran out of ideas, and there was no preparation to try and move the ball out to the wings. We kept trying to push it right up the gut, and they just stood there and slammed the door shut on us. I don't know, it seemed like we were tactically inflexible, and I didn't see anything from Dasso that showed that there was really any managerial presence happening on the sidelines throughout that entire game. What do you guys think? That was my impression. So,
okay, go Lars, you're up.
There's a few things I want to comment on. We'll start with Dasovic versus the players, because that's where this conversation has been focused for the past couple of minutes. There's only so much a coach can do, or manager can do. These guys are fledgling professionals, or they're aiming to be professionals. And yes, players come out flat in games. They make mistakes. They succumb to pressure. But if you are aiming to be a professional, you need to be a step above the other competitive players. It's one thing to be competitive. It's another thing to be a pro. And to completely cave and play poor, it doesn't bode well for a professional career. I think in Canada we fall into this trap, especially, I think me and Steve were talking about this earlier, we sort of hype up our own players, especially the ones that have come through the MLS systems, primarily because we're looking for that ray of hope, that next World Cup. And, we overrate our own players, and then maybe they even buy into the hype. I don't know. But what we saw out there, those were not professionals. Those were semi-pro players that, they'll have a bit of a career, but it's not going to be something that lasts. There's maybe a few out there who are going to have a long professional career. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was altitude. Altitude. The players, you can blame the performance on the altitude. Steve pointed out that they went down early to acclimatize, but the players came out flat. They spent the first 20 minutes of the game said it all. It was walking pace. There was no hustle at all. You can't sit back at altitude for 45 minutes or even longer, I guess, in their case, before they decided to do anything at all to try and peg one back. But you can't sit back and let your energy drain out over the course of the game. And maybe the strategy was to try and outweight Cuba. I don't know. But that's not a winning strategy. You have to go early, get that goal, and then sit back. Let Cuba, let whatever other team you are playing come at you and try and wear you down. Force them to run harder than you. Force them to come at you. But you can't do that right from the start. You can't just sit back and say 0-0 is good enough when we're supposed to be beating this team. That's all I got to say.
Well, I'm sure you'll have to say more in a little while. Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a minute here, because although it was another one of these kind of frustrating, disappointing results, and, we've all lived through many of these, I don't have to make a shopping list of them, I don't think. Let's say Ailman, when he's freeing in the keeper, he buries his chance. And then they go on and it changes the course of the game. Does this all get glossed over and we think we're firing on all cylinders? Because, there's a lot of hand-wringing online on Twitter and on various formats over the last couple of days. And, it kind of got me thinking, maybe we're making too much about this. Maybe we go in and if we get a win against Nicaragua, suddenly everybody's happy again. Or is this, and one other thing, is this a kind of a symptom of multiple disappointments that we take a more negative view? I don't know, that's a tough question to answer, maybe, Steve, but I'll throw it to you anyway.
I think it's become the cynical Canadian viewpoint, and I think it's really something that's evolved over decades now in Canada, where we look at the one chance that we created in the game and say, oh, we didn't convert that one chance. And rather than saying, heck, we only created one chance, other countries would say, whoa, we got 2 shots on goal. That sucks. we're like, oh, we didn't convert either of the 2 shots on goal. I think case in point, you don't just look at this game. You look at Canada's World Cup qualifying campaign with the senior team. You look at other levels that Canada has played at outside of the women, and we'll bemoan the fact that Kevin McKenna missed a header against Honduras at home. But still, it didn't create much. It didn't create anything out of open play. The fact is that Alleman getting that one chance and then Petrasso getting the one header, and that's about it before the goal, before Vukovic's late consolation. That's about it in terms of scoring chances. When you look at the talent on the 2 teams going into this game, you'd say Canada's got to get 15, 20 shots on goal. That's what the spread should be. And I think the point about the altitude is a good one, because altitude would be an excuse if they were playing another country that played at altitude and they had that advantage. But they were playing Cuba, a country that the altitude would be even more foreign to them than it would be to Canada. And that's where that's a big problem. Canada has got to get to the point, the analogy is that, and I talk to a lot of European scouts about Canadians, is that the only positions that Canadians are good at, and this is, Italian scout once said this to me, is holding midfield and center back, and they can't play any other position because, you're tough, you take a lot of abuse, but you don't have any skill. And that's generally the book that they have on Europe about us. And unfortunately, we prove that stereotype true over and over and over again by the way that we play, in the sense that we don't try to create sustained pressure. When Alleman goes up with the ball at his feet, people are griping he's hogging the ball. Well, he has no one to pass to. No one is making themselves available. No one is making runs for him. So he's left with the ball at his feet, and he's looking like a ball hog simply because no one is making any decent runs into space for him. So he's left a bit stuck. And the fact is that the Canadians do never create periods in a game where they enjoy sustained pressure, where the team lumps the ball out and then they mount another challenge. Really, when you look at the teams that can score and put the ball in the back of the net, if they miss one chance, they go, okay, we missed that chance. We're going to go and create more chances. But with Canada, you always get that feeling like, oh, we missed that one good chance that we're going to have all game long. And until that mentality changes, we're never going to get anywhere as a soccer nation.
Jeffrey,
yeah.
Do you remember the question? I'm just harassing you.
Yeah, no, actually, you're right. I don't.
Geez, I'm not sure that I do either.
Yeah,
no, I mean,
actually,
I was.
What I wanted to say actually is the one other chance that we did have was that point blank header that Daniil Henry managed to somehow
he skyballed it.
Sail. Oh man, that thing must have landed somewhere near the CN Tower after he I mean, my God, Daniil Henry has TFC-itis. You heard it here first. It's hopeless for him now. He's got the bug. Him and Becker and Welshman need to get the heck out of TFC as fast as they possibly can. I know I'm biased, but I don't care. Get them out of there. They're all going to come down with it. But another thing, too, is, saying that the only thing we can play is holding midfielder. Well, holy crap, if that's what Piet's main position is supposed to be, then we ain't got no hope at all, is the true answer to all of this. But one thing I want to know, and Steve, I want to know your opinion on this, is what is the conclusion to draw from that game? So if altitude can't be the culprit, because obviously us and Cuba, I mean, if anybody, Cuba should have been burnt out by it way sooner than we are. Everybody knows that. If altitude wasn't the problem, and maybe not coaching necessarily, does it just boil right down to the players? Is that the only logical conclusion out of all this?
I think that's where you have to look, and again, we're talking about guys with varying level of discipline. I think the surprise that Piet was so undisciplined in his positioning is the surprise, because he's the guy playing in Germany, right? I mean, if it was one of the guys coming from one of the academies here, you could understand them not having that kind of experience yet. But in Germany, that kind of stuff is hammered into you right from the start, and the fact that it was him was a little bit surprising. But at the end of the day,
I love that comment. What you
saw was that a lot of kids got unglued, and I think it gets back to that point that Lars was making about a lot of these kids think that they're better than they are. Let's face it, in Cuba, no one cares about this under-20 team. But I bet you that didn't even make the newspapers. I mean, haven't checked. Not that I normally check the papers in Cuba, except when I'm there, which I haven't been in a while. But the fact is that soccer is not a big-ticket item in Cuba at all. And these guys go in with no pressure. There's no expectations. The only pressure they have is if they're going to come back or not. And the fact is that Cuba is relaxing some of those laws now to actually let these guys maybe play outside the country and still play for the national team and not have to defect because of all the things that have happened there in the last few years. In fact, FC Edmonton has a guy that they just signed, Andy Ramos, who I understand I'm going to find out more about this tomorrow. Can actually still play for Cuba, even though he's living in Canada. So those things have changed, and that's an aside. But there's no pressure on the Cubans. The Canadian kids, you could feel that with all the bloggers and all the people who have really pushed up the self-importance of the TFC Academy kids, that have talked about Piet as the savior, that all the people who are groaning that Vukovic isn't starting an MLS somewhere, really gets to these kids, and that when things go bad, they don't seem to be able to sort it out. And that kind of mental toughness has been something that has been a real problem for Canada. And let's face it was a problem for our women's program before John Herdman came in and got a shrink in there to get that sorted out. It was a real problem at the World Cup in Germany, and now that's been fixed. But at every other level, that mental toughness has been a huge issue for Canada. We saw it how they fell apart in Honduras. We saw it yesterday in how badly this team handled adversity against a minnow in Cuba. So those kind of things need to be fixed. The U.S. didn't play well either yesterday, but they still got 3 points, and that was the difference. They were able to work through a bad performance and still take advantage of a team that they have to beat. Canada could not.
So what you're saying, Steve, is that you and us are the problem in reality.
Too much blogging and podcasting.
It's the all too powerful soccer media in Canada that we're just taking over.
These words have never been uttered before.
Yeah, that's right.
People shudder. The people shudder when they hear us coming. But no, the soccer community in Canada is very insular. And that's part of the problem. It's very self-congratulatory, and it's pretty insular. And we tend to, how shall I say, look for hope and look for bright signs and performances that in other soccer countries they would see as either mediocre or not good enough. And and you talked about TFC-itis. I've always thought that TFC-itis is, and for spending a lot of time there and covering that team for I think 5 years. The issue that I think actually spreads to all the Canadian soccer supporters is the idea that when things are going bad, you look at the few things in your program that are mediocre and you think they're pretty good. And I think that's the problems that in Toronto they've for a long time celebrated players who are pretty average, except they played in a bad team, so they stood out. And then the average guys sort of get hailed as saviors, and then you can't trade them. And there's no way that they actually should be starting on a good team. But the pressure is to keep those guys around. And I think in Canada it's the same way. We tend to say, oh, this guy is playing on the reserve team in the second division in a smaller European league. He's a budding star. Well, no, he's not a budding star. The fact is Canada has a couple of players in the Premiership and neither of those guys play, or 3 guys in the Premiership, 2 of which don't play for Canada. And the fact is that at the top levels of the game we've produced very little, and until we get to that level, until we start producing more skilled players rather than the pluggers who do really, really well in NCAA because that's what they create, and a lot of those central midfield center back kind of players, we're not going to do what we need to do up top, which is to pressure teams more, because guess what, that's how we keep the ball at the back of our net, by having it in their end a lot more, because we don't do that enough.
So Lars, I better go to you here for a second, and then I got one more question and one more round. So,
oh boy,
I was just gonna make a comment. I think it was the Alleman issue, and him missing that goal, just from personal experience. But it's tough to score when you're in front of the net. Believe it or not, it's not as easy as it looks. Everyone makes those mistakes. You put any single player in front of the net on any given chance, they're going to miss or they're going to put it in. But, it's not every time. It's not 100%. Should he have scored it? 9 times out of 10, yes. Maybe that was the 1 out of 10 times. As Steve said, you have to create more than 1 or 2 chances a game. If you're only creating 1 or 2, you don't really deserve to win the game. That's all I got to say. I think it's as simple and straightforward as that. I believe that's what the original question was about.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it was. Let me throw it back to you in a second here, though. So we're going against Nicaragua on Friday. There are a whole bunch of scenarios that you could cook up in between now and then. The result between Cuba and Nicaragua has an impact on this, obviously. But let's forget about all that. Let's go in assuming that we need a win. And Nicaragua is a bit of a black box. And let's go backwards around it this time. What do we need to do? Is there a ray of hope here? What does Dasovic need to do? What do the players need to do? What do we need to do to get a result out of that game to at least give us a chance to advance? Lars, you lead us off.
What does Dasso need to do? I think Dasso just needs to put his team out there. He needs to get his tactics straight, but the reality is it's the players who are going to decide whether they want to win the game or not. We saw that last game. Dasovic can put out the best formation. He can figure out all the little tricks and tactics that and the set pieces that are going to be thrown against Canada. It doesn't matter though if the players don't want to execute. It doesn't matter how much they acclimatize. Doesn't matter how well prepared they are. If the players go out there and say, "We don't want to be here," Canada isn't going to win that game. They're not going to get a draw. They're not going to get any result that they actually need to advance. So the players need to do a gut check. I feel like I'm talking about hockey, and maybe they'll have to give 110% and all that. But the reality is it's up to the players, and they have to decide they want to win, and they have to work hard. And they cannot be lazy. They cannot walk through the first half, and they can't mail in their performance. So, I don't know. To me, what I saw last game, they need to do everything opposite of what they did if they want to have a chance at winning.
Okay, Jeff, that's pretty bleak. Is there any hope on the horizon?
I'm on the 5th floor of my office building right now, and let me tell you, that window that opens up looks pretty inviting right now. So
they're all sealed, I think. They're all sealed. You don't have to worry. You can hurl yourself at that thing. It's like 3 inches thick. You'll never get out of it. You only weigh 75 pounds. So
wet.
Yeah, that's right.
What do we need to do? I don't think we can do it. How about we go there? I don't think we're going to beat Nicaragua. It's going to end 0-0, or they're going to end up getting a goal on the counter against us, something that, some occurrence happens, whether it's LaPena or Henry that has a brain fart at the back. Something's going to happen, and they're going to score, and we're going to end up actually losing and completely bombing out of this. And then all the crazies that were writing. I don't know if you guys saw any of the articles that were coming out of some of the papers in Toronto, especially the Toronto Sun. But man alive, some of the people that think they have all the answers to what's going on here are just crazy if they can watch these performances and maintain basically what the status quo is right now. But that's another topic altogether. So yeah, my answer, nothing. We are going to draw or lose the game. That's it.
Okay, Steve, finish us off.
I'm going to have a little more faith. I think that this team can pull it together and get a result. I think the more scary proposition now is if they do get the result, they probably won't win the group. And if they don't win the group, then you're looking at the United States, are we not, in the quarters?
It depends on the results between them and Costa Rica, does it not?
And either one, either Costa Rica or United States,
it's going to be difficult.
It's a tough group that they're in, and that's two very, very good sides. And is the Canadian team ready to take on that kind of challenge? And in fact, the United States have been disappointing so far, one game in. But that again, you're looking forward trying to get to that semifinal, which qualifies you for Turkey. And can a Canadian team do well enough? I do think there's going to be some personnel changes. I don't see Dasovic running the same 11 guys out there. I'm going to be a big FC Edmonton homer here and say I would love to see Alan Zeeby come in as a fullback. I think that He offers a lot, and I mean I see him a lot, so it's a little bit different. I see him more than any of the other players on the team. But to me, from what I saw in that game, Allen has a lot more going forward as a fullback. It can do more, except he's more on the right side, so you have to do some switching around there. But I would love to see him get a chance to break into that lineup and see what he can do. I also think Canada's just got to be a little more rigid in the midfield and win those midfield battles. They were losing almost all the physical battles to Cuba. Cuba is a physical team, and then they do like to actually get in the challenge, which to the person who's watching them and the amount of time they waste with staying down on the ground to actually think, well, actually they do get stuck into challenges pretty well, and they are pretty tough. Nicaragua won't have as many wild cards. Nicaragua will actually be more organized than Cuba. I think the fact that Cuba was so disorganized and sort of played whatever out there really threw off Canada. I think there's something to the way that Cuba played, almost like playing pickup soccer. Like, it was almost impossible to tell what formation they were playing. And I think I joked about it on Twitter during the game that I had no clue. And remember, some people actually paid me money to sort of pick this thing apart, and I was having a heck of a time trying to figure out what Cuba was doing. And sometimes I think that's like you're fighting the wild guy in the bar who's like just doesn't go down. You don't know what he's going to do. He's going to kick you in the shins. You don't know what he just doesn't.
He's going to bite you.
Yeah, and the Cubans were like that. It was like, well, how do we defend this? Because we don't know. The right back is playing at striker now. He just cleared a ball off the line. Now he's the target man. What the heck is this? The midfielders run over, and now he's playing left back, and this is like the exact opposite of total football, where no one knows where they're going, but somehow it's working out. So I think Nicaragua will be a bit of a different challenge in the sense that team will be more organized. But I think Canada just needs to settle down, use the ball, hold the ball. Nicaragua, remember, will be a little bit better with the conditions in Mexico than Canada will be, so that's going to be an advantage for them. And I think the Canadians just have to, one, get that marching band to play only Canadian songs. Like, teach it taking care of business, for Pete's sake. No.
Well, they were playing Call Me Maybe at one point. I mentioned on Twitter there's a little CanCon going on there, or Facebook or something.
I want to hear that band play side one of 2112.
La Via Strangiato. That's what they need to play.
That would be awesome with all the time signature changes, and then to have Geddy Lee appear in the middle of that band and just scream. And I think it would just give an advantage that no one would. That's the kind of support we need down there. But
nice.
I think that Canada will get through. I'm more concerned about that quarterfinal match than I really am with Nicaragua. I'm still going to be cocky enough and confident enough to look past Nicaragua.
Well, let's, speaking personally, let's hope you're right. And let's also cross our fingers that John Herdman put his psychologist on a plane down there for them, and maybe that'll get him over the hump. So it's about a week ago now that a report came out called the Easton Report, which was originally commissioned to talk about, I believe, a Division II professional league in Canada, with the purpose of trying to further develop or kind of be a bridge league between kids, soccer playing kids and soccer playing professionals. And what they came out with was not really what they predicted, and I found that kind of interesting. What they came out with was more of an under-23 Div 3 league recommendation. We've been reading up on this, and Jeff has been particularly curious about the Eastern Report, and we're gonna start it off with Jeff. Tell us what your take on it was, and I'm suspecting here that you're gonna bring this to a bit of a prairie perspective, because I think we're all very interested in what this could mean for our particular localities. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I definitely will do that, but the first thing I just want to say about it, and I'm really interested to hear what both Lars and Steve have to say, and even yourself, Rob, is why did it take having to hire a firm, a consulting firm, for what I'm sure was multiple thousands of dollars, to come up with these conclusions? I mean, do we not have enough collective brain power in this country, just between all of us blowhards like myself and others who are just, general fans of the game? All of us were screaming that something what the conclusion, which ended up being the U23 Division 3 style league, like regionalized style league, is the way that they need to go. And it just blows my mind. And I went on a tirade on Twitter. I love Twitter. I'm such a Twitter addict. But I went on a tirade, a diatribe, if you will, for probably a couple days, just asking everybody and anybody, why did it take having to hire some firm to come up with basically what should have been something that even the CSA, God willing, would have been able to eventually come up with on their own. The next point with that is now that we have it, so now that we have, and I believe the official name of the report is In a League of Our Own, because they have to give all these reports such fancy-dancy sounding names, don't they?
Especially if they're not a royal commission. Then they'd already have a title, but yeah, I get you.
Yeah, exactly. So In a League of Our Own, obviously the conclusion is to come up with a regional semi-pro development-focused league that would operate somewhat similarly to the CHL, so it would be divided into regions, and it would target it would have the ability, because of it being more of a semi-pro U23, it would have the ability that it could target the non-major centers throughout the country. So no longer would it kind of be handcuffed to just the Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, and maybe Calgary and perhaps Halifax, something like that. Now it's open to the prospect where there can be Victoria and Vancouver and perhaps one other, maybe I'm not sure which is larger, Kamloops or Kelowna, or maybe there's a better BC example. And then Edmonton and Calgary, and heck, maybe even Red Deer or Lethbridge, but that's probably pushing it a little bit. But my favorite, my golden nugget in all this is Saskatoon, baby. Saskatoon's going to be able to fit the bill. You just watch when I become president for life of Saskatoon City Football Club. You'll all tremble before me. It's going to be great. Saskatoon now could fit the bill for this. Maybe Regina, but nobody wants to go to a polluted wasteland anyway, so...
oh, jeez.
Yeah.
There's lots of people living in Saskatoon. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, at least we don't get our water out of a slough named after a real mean, dirty animal. So, anyway, yeah. So we're looking at the regional semi-pro league. I think this report, despite it probably being something that could have been done for so much less money and by the brain power in the country, finally it's here. Finally there's something that the CSA is going to be able to use in its further development, and then hopefully Tony Fonseca is going to be able to develop the technical side of the CSA's plan to match sort of incorporating something like the Div 3 league. I've probably taken too much time already, but that's my general take. I think this report's awesome. Thank God it's here finally, and hopefully we can do something with it that'll actually help us in the long run. So,
first of all, Jeff, I have to say that the buffalo or bison is a stately animal, and
it's angry and miserable all the time.
I disagree. I disapprove of your casting of it in such a harsh light. But beyond that, I'm going to throw it over to Lars. For his word on this, and I think we'll give Steve the last word on the Easton report. So, Lars, what do you think about that?
Well, I got quite a few thoughts on the Eastern report. First of all, if this was so easy to do already, or if this is something that we can do, how come it hasn't been done already? I know the report had talked about, pushing clubs to professionalize specific clubs which are ready, but that's not really how the structure works or has worked, especially on the prairies. As far as I understand it, the club structure just sort of ends and it never really takes off. I guess you're never really part of a club. Yes, you're zoned into a club or you're a part of something, but then, you play on different teams through the whole thing, and there's no real focus. There's no real dedicated cradle-to-grave club in Saskatchewan. I'm not sure about Alberta, but that's not typically how it's worked. So all of a sudden, we're going to be forcing these clubs to professionalize. If Saskatchewan's going to participate, let's say we have a club in Saskatoon, whether it's the one that Jeff wants. What was it, Saskatoon City FC?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's Aurora. But
God no.
But the reality is if these clubs are ready to make that jump, they'd be able to do it on their own. And the ones that aren't are going to need a businessman to step in and sort of push them over the top. And that's going to require them switching to a for-profit model, which brings a whole slew of other problems. I guess what I'm getting at here is it's one thing to produce a report, and it's one thing to endorse a report, but it's another thing to actually execute, which, by the way, I can't spell on my unfortunate laptop with my broken X key. But it's another thing to execute and make that happen. Because, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a believer in, free market economics. I have an economics degree. Usually, if something like this was possible, the free market would step in and make it happen. So unless the CSA, which specifically they said in the report, is going to be operating and managing this league, I don't think it has, at least in the western part of this country, a great future outside of BC and maybe Alberta.
Well, and that's a great segue, actually, Lars. Steve, maybe we could pick it up from there. I mean, obviously, you're a little bit more rich in Edmonton, given that you have an NASL team. Do you see a future for some of these under-23 leagues, or under-23 clubs in Alberta, maybe joining in with BC and kind of a region there, or maybe with the rest of the prairies, or is this still going to be mostly for the large centers and not so much for the hinterland?
I don't even know if it's for the large centers. I think the Easton report creates more questions than it gives answers. I think it gets back to the whole point of it's well and good to say you're fostering an environment where you're going to create all these regional semi-pro leagues, but they require investors. The CSA is not doing this. They're saying it would be nice to have this. Now, guys, come and show us the money. And you're going to find a lot of people are going to say, wow, soccer in Kamloops, soccer in Calgary, that's a bad investment. And unless you do something to incentivize it financially, where maybe you get the government to step in and say, look, if you start this soccer program that's good for the development of the game, there's going to be this many tax breaks for you. There's going to be this kind of I shouldn't use the word kickbacks because that's obviously not a word you want to use. Let's call it. You can't call it subsidies because I'm an Albertan and I'm allergic to subsidies. The fact is,
right.
Well, you're a transplanted Ontarian though, so I think subsidies are just fine.
Ontarians make the angriest Albertans. All the angriest, most conservative Albertans I know are ex-Ontarians.
That's awesome.
The fact is that the people from Toronto who move to Alberta tend to become the biggest reform Wild Rose Party loving people that I know. And so if you're from Toronto and you're listening to this and you move to Alberta, you wait till you put that Stephen Harper bumper sticker. It's about 3 months away from your arrival, from getting here. The fact is I don't see a lot of investors or business people wanting to get involved at this stage yet. I think this is an extremely hard sell. I think in Edmonton, no one's going to touch FC Edmonton. So that's the big question. That's one of the big questions. Now, where's that money? Who's going to invest? The soccer has been plagued by fly-by-night investors for the longest period of time, guys that stay in for 6 months and then get out and fold a team and then wreck the sport in a city because
Mel Kowalczyk
actually violent. Honestly, I've known Mel for a long time. Mel isn't a money guy. He's a general manager. And he's not a guy that's backed, and he gets blamed for a lot of things that he didn't do. For example, he wasn't part of the Aviators. A lot of people say, "Oh, he did this for the Aviators." Well, actually, he was living in Albuquerque at the time. He had nothing to do with that team. The second thing that I saw from the report, the big winner in this, the ultimate winner in this, is the North American Soccer League. The report was originally supposed to talk about Division 2, which again would have been, where's FC Edmonton going to play? Would the CSA force FC Edmonton and Ottawa to leave NASL at some point, which they don't want to do? Trust me, they don't want that at all. They didn't. This report said, no, in the end, we're going to do Division 3. Left Division 2 untouched, which means the North American Soccer League has carte blanche to operate in Canada and will be recognized as Division 2. The big loser in this is United Soccer Leagues. United Soccer Leagues, just forged this agreement with the MLS to come in as the Div 3. And for some reason, I don't know why, because this report was released to the public a couple of weeks ago, but people in the soccer community knew about this since November or October of last year. MLS would have seen it. And if they didn't, there's a serious problem over there in terms of them taking Canada for granted. The fact is they carve out this deal between MLS and USL. And I was on that press conference when they announced that deal. And I asked Tim Holden, I asked Todd Durbin, well, the CSA isn't going to sanction your league. And the awkward silence that followed was really interesting. It was sort of like, they won't. They're not going to let us come into Canada. Well, they will, but they won't sanction your league. It's not going to be officially recognized. And that's a big win for this NASL-USL war. NASL is a huge winner in Canada. They're going to be protected. They're going to be recognized. Ottawa and Edmonton and any future expansion team, and trust me, if Calgary, if you're an investor and you have a choice between being an under-23 regional league or going to NASL, same with Winnipeg, you're going to choose NASL. You'd be a fool to go into under-20 with your money. I'd be like, I don't want to do your finance. I don't want to be your financial advisor because you're an idiot with money. The fact is you're going to gravitate toward the bigger fish and playing the American teams. Canadians outside the CFL have this real interesting block, which is that we somehow legitimize our leagues by playing Americans. We could have the same soccer league at the same level, and we're only playing Canadian teams, and attendance will drop by a half simply because we're not playing New York, we're not playing Los Angeles. There is something about this in our Canadian psyche that I find exceptionally interesting, how much we gravitate and we need to be playing the Chicagos and the New Yorks and the LAs of the world to legitimize ourselves. It's sort of like the Canadian musician who has to be big in the United States before they're big in Canada. So we have some issues there. And I really see that as a barrier to this league getting off the ground and going forward. And USL, what are they going to do now? I mean, they supposedly have this agreement with Toronto FC, Vancouver, and Montreal to have their farm teams, I guess. And they hate the word farm teams. They're developmental teams in USL. But if they're not sanctioned, and the report does say, and if you look at that report, one of the recommendations is that the 4 existing professional teams, FC Edmonton and the 3 MLS teams, put their reserve teams in the Canadian Division 3. So there's obviously a mandate coming from Canada that MLS missed the memo. And to me, that is sort of scary to show how little MLS is following what we're doing up here in Canada. And I think that's concerning. As well as a final point, and I have said this many times, and I said this before the report came out, but I wasn't as public about it simply because I wanted to wait for the report to come out. I have a real problem with us as a country. And outside of hockey, we have this huge inferiority complex. The fact that we have a national report that somehow figures out the best way for us to go forward is a national Division 3 strategy, to me suggests just how mediocre Canadians tend to shoot for in sports outside of hockey. How we're going to shoot for the safe, reachable target and not like shoot for a big, really desirable target. You know, we are the classic, case of just shooting for the easy goal. And really, if we're going to talk about developing a national soccer strategy, and we're not talking about National Division 2, National Division 1, we shouldn't talk about it at all. If we're not going to talk about a national strategy and somehow repatriating the game without talking about how Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are going to fit into this, we shouldn't do it at all. Because guess what? Without those markets, I can't see any kind of Canadian regional league work or regional leagues working or setup working. I can't see any sort of system working without them being at the top of the pyramid in some way. And I just have a real problem with the idea that as Canadians, we somehow commission a report to come up with a national strategy for semi-pro soccer. What a sort of I hate to say it, but what sort of loser goal is that? Like, yeah, like let's come up, let's spend all this money on a report so we can form a semi-pro league. National semi-pro, that's where it's at. But as one soccer general manager who is American told me, it exists in a team. You Canadians already sold out your divisions 1 and 2 to the United States. We run those leagues for you. So that's all you got left. And I think it's a sad state of affairs that so much of our game, just for the urge of getting into MLS, we have sold our future. What I'm seeing more and more, we're selling our future down the road. And so now we're left with no options. And we're left always going to be beholden to what the USSF wants for its soccer development plan. We're seeing that at the MLS level. we don't see it so much at the NASL level, because the NASL level really exists in a different sphere right now, which is a very interesting place. But I think between MLS and USL, we're seeing a lot of good being done for the US game and not much attention being paid to the Canadian game at all. But that's what we're stuck with, and the best we can come up with is National Semi-Pro League. It's a sad state of affairs, and in fact, it's sort of tragic when you think about it.
You know, and that's interesting that you say that, because I think it'd be an excellent topic for a future show, is to just have that discussion. Canada and MLS, what is the relationship, and, you know, what's the actual, when you look at the strategy, when MLS's strategy along with USSF's, what is actually happening? Do we even know what's actually happening? And is MLS actually good for Canada in any speakable way whatsoever?
I've asked that question, and I asked that question to the USL MLS, and I got a lot of no answers, or we'll get back to you.
Huh.
They can tell you how good it is for U.S. soccer, but I think now that the 3 Canadian teams are in, there's a lot less talk now about developing soccer from the MLS, and it's pretty sad. The lip service has even stopped. At one point, there was a lot of lip service. I remember talking to Don Garber one-on-one in Toronto ahead of MLS Cup, and him saying, our goal is to get Canada and the United States in a World Cup together, and it sounded all great and well and good. And now, maybe to their credit, they're not even talking about that anymore. Like, they simply talk about American soccer, and I guess that's good. And there are people that have said to me that we look at it as 3 Canadian teams playing in an American league, and we're going to ask ourselves that question down the road, especially if the academies don't pan out for the players that are playing. What is that benefit? Definitely is a lot of benefit to the Americans. We give them better per capita TV numbers than they get in the States. They have lots of sellouts in those 3 cities. They get great markets that have been part of MLS 2.0. But what is Canada getting in return? And we don't know yet. And I think it's still early in our relationship. But I certainly think that MLS needs at least a PR lesson. I think that some of the people need to snap their heads back. I definitely think they need to open a MLS Canada office. I think the fact they're running it out of New York without a parallel Canadian office is a bit insulting. Even NFL Canada has an office, and they don't have a team here. Well, let's count the Buffalo Bills. But
touche.
But MLS doesn't, and I think for a league that has so much of it riding on Canada, they need to do a lot better job. They're doing a very, very poor job reaching out to Canada and saying, this is what we're doing for your soccer development. This is what we're doing for your program. And I think this is a lot of the reasons why CSA is now going to shut this MLS USL out, at least at an official sanctioning level.
And that brings us to the end of episode 3. Thanks very much for listening. We're hoping to be back just prior to MLS First Kick, so we can give you our take on the 3 Canadian MLS teams' prospects in the upcoming MLS season. One final note, thanks very much to our special guest Steven Sander for his time and expertise. Hope to talk to you soon. Until then, take care.